What's up, team? I just recently finished watching Spider-Noir on Amazon Prime Video, and I wanted to do a chat slash review about it. So that is what we're going to be doing today, Spider-Noir review. Uh, I'm a huge Spidey fan, as you can see. I've got the Spider-Man poster right over. Why is this so hard? Right there. uh, it's even got Noir on it down in the or up in the corner somewhere. Anyway, so huge Spider fan. The noir universe is obviously its own kind of separate thing, and so you have to take it as like very much a spin-off slash alternate universe. As far as the Spidey canon is concerned, and that's totally fine. That will come up repeatedly as I talk about the show in this review. But to start, Spider Noir is inspired by the character from Into the Spider Verse, the animated film by Sony that came out a few years ago, and that character was so popular, and Nick Cage was such an integral part of that character's identity as his voice that they decided to make a whole show about his character, or ostensibly his character, in Spider Noir. As it turns out, it's not his character at all. So I thought that this was going to be essentially like a canon adjacent to the Spider-Verse films, and that this was going to be the same character. It is not the same character at all. It's actually quite different. So the first thing that you notice right away is that this is not Peter Parker, or at least probably it's not Peter Parker. We'll come back to that. But this is Ben Riley, or at least a version of Ben Riley, who we classically know as Scarlet Spider. But this character is not the Peter Parker from the Spider-Verse film. So just be aware of that going in. If you're expecting like that same character, it's not the same character, though. Obviously, it's still Nick Cage, so they share some of the similarities in mannerism and stuff like that, but they are not the same character. So that connection is tangential at best. It was really just an excuse for them to make a show about this Spider Noir character using Nick Cage. That's all it really is. Speaking of Nick Cage, he's obviously wonderful in this. I think the highlight of this show is the cast, and Nick Cage in particular is excellent. He just inhabits the body of this character so well. He has this sort of sarcastic wit that's perfect for a Spider-Man. He has like very clear motivations. He's very relatable. He's likable. He's funny. And he even gets to do like some Nick Cageisms at certain points during the show as well, which is great. The rest of the cast is also wonderful, though. I was actually very surprised by some of the choices they made in casting here, but they're all really great. I don't think that there's a stinker in the cast at all. I think they're all wonderful. Uh, Lee Jun Lee playing Kat Hardy, she's excellent. She's beautiful. We had Lauren Morris playing this version of Robbie Robertson, which is great. We had the actor, I don't remember all of their names, but the actors playing the secretary, all the villains. So Flint Marco, Megawatt, Lonnie Lincoln, or Tombstone. Those are all wonderful. They all did an excellent job. I have no criticisms about the casting whatsoever in the show. I think they did an excellent job. But the standout, other than Nick Cage for me, is Brendan Gleeson as Silvermane. He steals every single scene that he is in. And I mean, this is not surprising. Brendan Gleeson is a legendary actor, and this is like the perfect role for him. It just fits him so well. He plays like this Irish mob boss character. He's so intimidating. He's so intelligent. He gets duped a few times, but he's intelligent in like the way he speaks and the way he exerts his power and manipulates people. and he really is like the focal point of the villain story, and I loved him so much. I think he deserves the most accolades out of anyone in the cast other than Nick Cage himself. Like I said, he absolutely carries every single scene he's in. He's an absolute joy to watch. This show was released in two different formats, so you can watch it in either black and white or in color. Uh, I don't know what kind of psychopath you would have to be to watch this show in color, at least the first time you watch it. Um, it's Spider-Noir. It has to be a black and white. That's like the entire aesthetic point of the show. But as I'll talk about in a moment, I actually do understand the choice to do a color version because of some tonal differences in the show that I was not expecting. So I knew because it was Nick Cage that the show was going to be a bit silly and campy, and that's the direction they were going to go. I wasn't expecting it to abandon the noir tone so quickly. Um, at the very, very beginning, like in the very first episode, there's like a brief narration. But even at that point, you can tell like it's very bright, it's very whimsical, it's like moving quickly. The tone is not that of a noir film in essence at all. It is noir in setting for sure, and it's noir in the overall plot machinations. It has that sort of central detective mystery that noir has, but tonally, it is nothing like noir. It is very campy, it's very over the top, it's very modern. It's not really fussed with capturing the essence of a noir detective story from a tonal perspective. It feels like a modern Marvel show. In its writing, in its presentation, in its pacing. It's really not what I was expecting it to be from that perspective. I thought that we would spend a lot more time inside Ben Riley's head, traditionally in noir, you have like the main character narrating throughout and giving like perspective on what's going on, and things happen very very slowly. You're sort of trickled information through the perspective of the main character, but you're not really getting the other side much. This show is not concerned with any of that at all. It is a true modern show, from the way it's filmed to the writing to the the way it's paced. It's very much not a noir show. If you're going into it expecting like a true noir detective show, you're going to be disappointed. And initially, I was a little bit disappointed, but it picks up steam and it kind of carves out its own thing. And so it didn't bother me that much by the end of it. But I do find myself wishing for a true Spider Noir show, animated or live action or otherwise, that really does capture that tone, that essence of noir. Um, but this is not that show, so we're gonna talk about it within the context of what this show is. Okay, I don't want to judge it too much on what it's not. I think when you do that in criticism, you fall into this trap where you're not judging a show based on its own merits. You obviously have to mention some of these things at the start, but again, I want to judge the show for what it is, and I don't want to focus so much on what it's not. So the setup, we have Ben Riley is this version of the character. He's a private investigator. He has a secretary who is wonderfully funny. I think the actress's name is Karen Rodriguez. Excellent character, bounces off of Nick Cage so well. It provides like a sort of layman's perspective to a lot of things. She's great. So they're running this failing private detective business. Ben Riley used to be the Spider, is what they call him. He's not Spider-Man. He used to be the Spider until 5 years ago. There was like a tragic event where the love of his life died, and so he retired the Spider and has been just living as Ben Riley. Um, but then a series of circumstances begin. He is asked to look into an affair. Turns out to be fake, but an affair between a cabaret dancer, singer woman, and the mayor of New York City by a random guy, and that turns into and unravels into this huge mystery detective story, um, about that character, the woman. Her name is Kat Hardy, played by Lee Jun Lee, and her relationship with the mayor, and then her relationship with Silvermane, who's like the big Irish mafia crime boss in the show. And then there's a sort of a secondary story about these superpowered villains that keep popping up. The first one is a guy that can control fire, who's like an original character for this show. He's only there for a little while because he dies pretty early, but he's sort of the fulcrum or the impetus for exploring these superpowered villain characters. And so the show has a few threads that it's following, but I think it does a really good job of giving you little pieces of information as the show goes on. I found myself really actually interested in what the characters' motivations were, how they were connected to each other, who was double crossing who at what time, and so on. That part was all great, and that part of the noir mystery side they kind of nailed, I think, because the core plot, the mystery is really quite excellent, I thought. So you're kind of always questioning like who's motivated by what, and who actually is aligned with who, and so on. And it's really great. So I will say that the first episode's really good, and then it does slow down a little bit. There's a bit of a slow burn getting through like episodes 2 through 4 or so, and then it really picks up steam. And the last like 4 episodes I thought were just really well paced and quite fast, and really bring you through. Like I the beginning I had a little bit hard time getting invested, but by about halfway through the season I was fully in, and I really enjoyed the back half of the season quite a bit. Um, so the villains, so there's quite a few villains in the show. They all get varying degrees of screen time. The main villain, the one you're going to spend the most time with, is Silvermane, which is great because he is excellent. I think they knew they had lightning in a bottle with Brendan Gleeson as that character. He's as I kind of mentioned earlier, he's very intimidating. He's very powerful. He's very um he's very intelligent, but he does get duped a couple of times by Ben Riley, by Kat Hardy. But the whole time, he still sort of seems like he's on top. It's really interesting. Yeah. The way that the character is written and played, you always feel like he has the upper hand, even though you know that he's being tricked. And I think that's like a really interesting balance for that character. He never feels like he's losing, even though he's ostensibly losing the whole show. It's really great. Um, so he is the target of an assassination attempt by this fire-based character that we learn about pretty early on, and then dies in a confrontation with Nick Cage very early on in the show. And so he is trying to figure out Silvermane is trying to figure out who hired this fire guy to burn down his house. That ends up leading this version of Robbie Robertson to do some investigating. So he's like try to get his job back at the Bugle, and he is trying to do some investigating to figure out what happened, and why this villain was given superpowers first of all, and then why he was targeting Silvermane, and all of that. So you follow Robbie for a chunk of the show as well. And Lamar Morris does an amazing job as the character. I think he has this like great sort of snappy wit about him. His relationship with Ben is quite fun. during his investigation, he ends up finding this version of Lonnie Lincoln, who we know as Tombstone. And this is kind of the first point of the real criticism I have of the show, is that I just didn't like this version of Tombstone, um, for a few reasons. The main reason is just aesthetically, I didn't like the way that his makeup was done. In fact, a lot of the villains in the show, you could tell there was some budget limitations as to like how they were going to pull off some of these effects with the villains. But I just didn't really like what he looked like. He kind of looks like a Klingon from Star Trek. It's very strange. Um, Tombstone, obviously this is noir. It's a totally separate universe. They can kind of do whatever they want. They can play around. It's not like they're beholden to any specific version of the character. But Tombstone, it has always been a character, at least in the comics, that was albino or became albino and was like bullied and belittled for that. And that was like a core part of his character. They kind of abandoned that in this show. Well, they don't kind of, they really just completely abandon that in this show, in favor of going more towards him being African American, which he is. He's traditionally portrayed as an albino African American. But they just lean into the African American part for this show because that gives him a relationship with Robbie, and because of the time that the show is set in, obviously at that point segregation was still a thing, and black people were treated much worse than they are today. And so they lean into that a little bit, not too much. It's not so ham-fisted that it's like egregious. Um, but they just sort of abandon the albinism of the character, and also his powers are weird, like kind of inconsequential. He kind of looks like a weird like Klingon looking thing. I just didn't really like that. Now the actor who plays him is wonderful, and his story is great. And I thought that, the character, it works really well in the show, but I don't know why it had to be Lonnie Lincoln. It could have been a brand new character, and it would have worked just as well, if not better, because you wouldn't have had this like Tombstone thing looming over it. Um, because it just didn't feel like Tombstone. Um, it felt like a brand new character. So I was like, why didn't you just do that? Um, but anyway, so he has, the classic, sort of strong skin, super strength sort of thing. He ends up being connected to these other characters who were with him in a POW camp in World War I. And this camp is where they all received their superpowers, or they call them mutations in the show. Um, and the way that they get these powers, spoilers, by the way, we're getting past the first couple episodes as far as spoilers go now. So at this point, warning, if you're watching this or listening to this, I'm going to start talking about like pretty big spoilers. Everything up to this point was like kind of in trailers. You pretty much knew about it, but now we're going to talk about some spoilers. So that's your warning. Spoilers going forward. So Lonnie's character, Lonnie, and the rest of these villain characters were all at this POW camp. That it turns out that one of the twists is that Ben Reilly is the one who, well, before he was Ben Reilly, we'll get there, was the one who saved them from this camp. They were all being experimented on using like gene splicing. And so they all got their powers by having like basically a series of experiments run on them that ended up making differences to their genetic code. And so I had to look this up because I didn't really understand how Tombstone got his powers in the show. Apparently they spliced his genes with that of an alligator, and that's why he has this like scaly sort of skin look, and that's what gives him his like harder skin. And I just found that very strange. I didn't really understand like why they decided to go that direction. I don't know. It's just very weird. Again, they could have just made a brand new character, but anyway. And then the other characters, so there's this fire guy who, I mean, they just had to have a fire guy to set up like the burning down Silvermane's house story, but he's not he's an original character for the show as far as I'm aware. And then there's Flint Marko, who is Sandman, I thought he was excellent throughout. I have no criticism about how they handled Sandman. I think they nailed the inner conflict of the character. They nailed um, his mannerisms. He's a goon. He's I just think he's great. The show focuses on him quite a bit for good reason. The actor who plays him is really great. So Sandman is excellent. The way they do his makeup is, in my opinion, the best out of any of the villains in the show. And at the end, he does have like a real moment where he fully becomes Sandman. But for the majority of the show, he's just got these like sandy, coarse textures across his skin. And you can tell that they did this to preserve the face of the actor because he's excellent, and also for budget reasons, I'm sure. So it's just practical makeup, but it looks great. Other other villains have problems with the way that they look. Obviously, we talked about Tombstone, and then Megawatt is in this, which is very strange. I just assumed it was going to be Electro, but then they said the name of the character, and it's not Electro. It's Megawatt, which is like this one-off villain from like a random Spider-Man comic. Um, it's very. I just thought they were going to go with Electro, but they didn't, which is fine. But his like the way they do his makeup with his like electricity sort of coming up on his cheeks, it just doesn't look good, and it doesn't make him very intimidating, and it doesn't give you this feeling that he's like very powerful. The electricity effects are good. There's just a fight, there's actually a couple fights with him in them, and the electricity effects look good, especially in black and white. They like really pop. But I just didn't like the way that he looked like when he was just normal walking around. But they wanted to try to like make you understand that he's an electricity guy, so they had to like put these sort of electric veins all over him. I just wasn't a huge fan of that. The character himself is hilarious. He's like this. He actually has a similar story to the character from the comics, which is cool. But he's like this aspiring actor who wants to like be on Broadway and have a big show, be a star. But he's also just like an evil bastard. And it's a really cool juxtaposition. Like, he's a very unique character. I really liked it. He's very over the top. It's very hammy. It's very campy. But I think the actor does what he can with the material in such a way that he just is hilarious. He has some of the best lines in the whole show just because he's got this weird persona. There's a scene with him in a prison where Silvermane goes to like talk to him for the first time. Oh, that scene is excellent. I didn't really like the way he was doing his voice. It sounded kind of fake. I don't know what the actor sounds like in real life, but you could tell he was like adding a little bit of like gravel to it in a way that felt fake. But that kind of works because in the show, in the context of the show, he's like an aspiring actor, and he's like clearly hanging up being this like henchman goon villain character. So maybe it was intentional. Anyway, he's great. So there's quite a few villains. I just thought it was an odd choice to go with Megawatt instead of Electro. But the more I was thinking about it, like as I was kind of preparing for this, I was thinking, well, there must be licensing problems, or they're trying to avoid having like certain characters be a part of this show and also be a part of other shows. Um, like there's clearly a reason why they went with Ben Riley instead of Peter Parker. Um, they clearly wanted to separate this character from the Spider-Verse version is the main thing. And also, I think Sony has like a specific vested interest in keeping Peter Parker separate from this version of the character. Um, they have like an idea of who Peter Parker is, and this is not him. And this is not the show where you would have Peter Parker. At least yet. Well, again, we'll get there. And then having like a new villain be the fire guy, uh it is fine. Like, they didn't have to introduce a character that we already know. Having it be Megawatt instead of Electro, maybe they're trying to preserve Electro for something else. Brand New Day is coming up pretty soon, so all of this may have something to do with Brand New Day. We know Tombstone is going to be in Brand New Day though, So that's kind of a weird choice to have that same character in both, but be wildly different. But maybe they're leaning into that for like multiverse reason. I don't know. They clearly had their reasons. I don't know what those reasons are. But it's the thing that is obvious is that they want this to be its own self-contained thing, and it's very separated from the rest of what they're doing with Spider-Man canon right now. Um, the Spider-Verse trilogy was the impetus for the creation of this show, but it has nothing to do with this show. And obviously, like Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the mainline Spider stuff is not related to this either. So it's its own self-contained thing, which is completely fine. It actually services this show well because it can do things that it otherwise would have had to like make concessions about. And whether or not you like all of the choices that were made in this show, I don't like all of the choices that were made in the show. It did have, it seems like, the freedom to just be its own thing, and so they could be pretty creative with the way that they tackled some of this stuff. So anyway, like everything from the way this version of the character gets his powers, he doesn't get bit by a spider. He gets bit by this like really creepy human spider hybrid thing at this POW camp, and so that's like already pretty different. So there's a lot of changes that are made to the characters, but again, it's its own thing, so they can kind of do whatever they want. The show, speaking of that POW camp, and from that point moving forward, the show takes like a pivot in episode, I think it's like 6 and 7, maybe it's just episode 6, um, where it basically goes completely off the rails and lets the show be a very strange body horror show out of nowhere. Like up until that point, there's been like elements of violence and stuff. It's not a tame show by any means. But it had been like pretty grounded, and then they show this like POW camp flashback, and then Ben gets kidnapped by this doctor lady and gets pulled into this lab, and they start doing experiments on, or they start like basically tearing him apart, like cutting him open and stuff, and showing like all this crazy body horror. It's very weird. Like it can't kind of came out of nowhere this episode. Um, but the and so I kind of was like thrown off by this weird tonal shift. Luckily, it doesn't last very long. It's one episode and then it's gone. You go back to the sort of regularly scheduled programming, but it just kind of came out of nowhere. The benefit of which, and this was clearly the inspiration, is that Nick Cage gets to sort of be like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. He gets to like have these really crazy Spider mannerisms where he's like constantly doing this kind of thing and gets very physical and very Nick Cagey. So I appreciated that aspect of it, even if it was just an excuse to let Nick Cage be a crazy person for an episode or two. It was fine. I was okay with it because he's excellent and hilarious. But yeah, it's just it kind of a left field thing. So then you get to kind of the end of the show, the payoff. All of these different sort of disparate mysteries all start to come together. Kat Hardy is in love with Flint Marko, and like all of her motivation for doing everything that she has done up to this point is, because of her love for him. Um, she has like a short term affection for Ben, but then there's this excellent moment right at the end of the show where she basically tries to apologize to Ben for like leading him on, and Ben basically tells her in no lesser terms to piss off. It's excellent. And so on brand for his character. Um, but she is trying to basically take out Silvermane so she can run away with Flint Marko. So she ends up getting the final say and shooting Silvermane at the end of the show. The circumstances by which they get there are excellent. There's this whole sequence where Ben is talking to Silvermane as Ben, and then he calls the spider, but he's talking to Robbie, and then Robbie shows up in the spider suit. That whole sequence is really great. Other than there is something that this show does tend to do sometimes, which bothers me about this show and other shows, is it does this like fake manufactured tension thing. I hate when suspense shows or movies, horror shows or movies, thriller shows or movies like this do this thing where they try to manufacture this tension that's totally unearned. They're just doing it for the sake of like either padding out the runtime or trying to get critics to clap like seals at how tense it is. It's not. So there's this again. I'll just reference this one scene. So there's this sequence where again Ben is in this room talking to Silvermane, and Silvermane basically calls him out as being the spider. And Ben's out is that he calls Robbie, and Robbie pretends to be the spider and then shows up. But there's about like 10 or 15 minutes where it's just tension building and nothing is happening, and it's just characters talking to each other, and it's very slow, and you're like, all right, come on. Like there's this the sort of crux of this is like Silvermane's got his gun pointed at Cat, and he's like, I'm gonna shoot her, I swear I'm gonna shoot her unless you save her because you're the spider, right? And this goes on for like 5 minutes, and it's like, dude, we all know that Robbie's gonna show up in the spider suit, and then the show can move on. Like you don't need to spend 5 minutes with Silvermane pointing his gun at Cat, being like, "I'm gonna shoot her, dude. Trust me, bro. I'm gonna shoot her. You're the spider, right? You'll save her if you're the spider." And then Nick Cage going, "Oh well," blah, blah, and like coming up with all these like different reasons to continue the conversation. It's just, I hate that. I hate that crap. I will always hate that crap. It's like my main criticism of this show's writing is it does this sometimes, um, where like you already know. So tension. Here's what I will say. Let me back up a second. Tension building only works if you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You understand? So if you're building suspense in a horror movie, in a thriller, in any movie where you're like really trying to build up that tension with somebody, the audience, you have to do it when the audience actually doesn't know what's going to happen. Because if you know what's going to happen, it's just annoying. You're just sitting there waiting for the thing to happen. That's not tension. That's just obnoxious. Okay? So, in the example I gave, we all know they already had the conversation with Robbie and Ben on the phone, with Robbie impersonating the spider. We already know as soon as Silvermane says to Ben, "You're the spider, right? You can save her, but only because you're the spider." The second he says that, Robbie should walk in the room. There does not need to be this ridiculous 5 minute long conversation before Robbie shows up. Now, the show plays this off like it's a timing thing. Like Robbie is, you know, he obviously can't just like teleport immediately there, but it doesn't need to be as long as it was. And it was clearly an effort to create tension instead of just letting the show proceed. And that sort of crap really bugs me. Again, the lesson that I would say for writers, and I'm not saying that I'm like an amazing writer or that I understand how to make movies. This is just from a critical perspective as an enjoyer of film. If you're gonna have tension building, if you're gonna have suspense, you can't do it in a situation where the audience already knows what's going to happen at the end of that buildup, because all you're doing at that point is annoying everybody and making them check their watch until the thing happens. You know what I mean? So keep it snappy. You can absolutely have suspense building, but it has to be in a situation where the obvious thing isn't the thing that's going to happen, right? So just keep that in mind. It's just a thing that I have with this show and other shows. But anyway, Cat gets to take out Silvermane. Ben gets to have his big spider fight, mostly with Megawatt, but slightly with Sandman as well. And then Robbie and Tombstone get to have their like moment. Basically, there's like this cure for the villains, and it turns out that it ends up being Robbie that cures Tombstone, so they get to have their like brother moment. Um, and so everybody kind of gets their payoff. But again, Kat tries to like apologize to Ben for basically flirting with him, and even though she clearly was still in love with Flint, and he basically tells her to piss off, which is so perfect. And then Ben goes back to being the private investigator, but he instead of having the woman as his secretary, he brings her up to be a partner in the private investigator business, which is totally appropriate because she was doing all the work anyway, and she's great. Um, Robbie ends up starting a new newspaper. He like briefly was working back at the Bugle, but he starts doing his own newspaper. And so there's good payoff for all of these characters. Everyone kind of gets their send off. And if this show is just the one season, I think it's totally fine as a one season self contained show. I don't think they need to do anything more, but they could. So we've been kind of talking about. I've referenced a few times this twist that I think that the show is going to go with. So it's mentioned a few times that when Ben gets back from the war and he has his spider powers, he takes a little bit to reintegrate into society because in this version of the character, the spider powers also give him these like spider instincts and these spider mannerisms, which is just an excuse to have Nick Cage be a physical actor. But in the show, he genuinely has a hard time like separating the spider from the human person. And so he takes a little bit to reintegrate into society. And when he does, he assumes a new identity as Ben Riley. So Ben Riley is not his real name. This is never confirmed in the show, but my guess is if they decide to do a season 2 and they have the licensing from Sony to do so, the twist will be that pre this event, he was Peter Parker. And then he abandoned that name to become this version of the character Ben Riley. That's my guess. This is obviously none of this is confirmed, but I would I would bet real money that if they were to do a season 2, that would be the big twist, and we would get the Peter Parker backstory for him pre the war. Um, that sort of gives him this sense of responsibility and justice that Spider-Man has, because ultimately in this show, the first moment where you see Ben being a hero is during this war segment where he basically opts to sacrifice himself or put himself in extreme danger to save these soldiers in this camp. And I think what the show will likely do if it goes into a second season is explain why Ben had that sense of responsibility, because and also probably why he named himself Ben, um, is likely because of in this universe an Uncle Ben type situation. So my guess would be that he is Peter Parker pre-war. Um, he has an Uncle Ben situation. He decides to enlist to, be a hero. Then he gets his powers, reintegrates into society, and uh, abandons the name Peter Parker and takes on the name Ben for his uncle. That's my guess. Again, all speculation, but I would hazard to say that that's likely what's going to be the case. Okay, so let's wrap it up. So, my final thoughts on the show. I thought Spider-Noir was pretty good, generally speaking. I think the show does a lot of things right. I think the main, well, the cast is excellent across the board. The villains are great. Nick Cage is great. The story, like the plot and the mystery, is really well done. The way it sort of trickles out characters' motivations and stuff is excellent. It looks great. It sounds great. The acting is great. There are just a few things that I didn't like about it. The main thing being the villain designs and some of the choices they made with the villains, like who they are and how they got their powers and what they look like. Um, and then some of the pacing with, like, again, this sort of fake tension building throughout the show, really culminating in that last couple of episodes. But outside of that, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it. I think it's one of those shows where if you go into it with the right expectations, which is that it's going to be this sort of, you know, just one off Spider Man show, it's not really trying to be connected to the larger Spider Verse. It's just its own thing. And if you go into it with that expectation and just let it be its own thing, I think you'll have a really great time with it. So I think it was good. I wouldn't be surprised if it does quite well and gets a sequel season. But if this is all we get, then I think we got a great show out of it. So yeah, I think. Oh, and also, I watched the whole thing in black and white. I think you should watch it in black and white. But if you end up watching it in color, uh, that's. I don't think that's a disservice to the show as much as I thought it would be. Basically, the black and white is. Uh, I think the black and white would be a really important thing to maintain if the show was trying to be only a noir show, but it isn't trying to just be a noir show. It's also trying to be like a modern sort of superhero Marvel show. I personally watched the whole thing in black and white, and I'm glad I did. It looks great in black and white. But if you end up watching it in color, I don't think that's going to be like a disservice to the show at all. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Spider Noir. This, as all of my videos, went on for way longer than I thought it was going to, because it turns out I have way more to say than I originally thought. But let me know what you guys think about Spider Noir. Just kind of, whether or not you feel it was a necessary addition to the canon, if you like the way that the show presented itself, and what your expectations are for Spider Man moving forward. We're obviously getting Brand New Day coming up soon at the end of, or well, it's closer to the end of the summer. And so that's going to be a really interesting way to bounce back from Spider Noir into the next phase of the Spider stuff. So, all right, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you watched, I appreciate it, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.